What's happening, guys? Welcome to Let's Talk Comics, and today we are going to talk about comic books in the 90s, specifically some of the comic book companies that were out there during the 90s that people have either never heard about or maybe have forgotten about. But during the 90s, there was a lot of, for the first time, there was a lot of mainstream I don't want to say mainstream publicity, but there was a lot of people trying to get comic books out. There was a lot of new companies that were starting, a lot of imprints that were starting, and a lot of those books, because of publications like Wizard Magazine, managed to get a little bit of publicity, to get a little bit of hype behind them, but they didn't really last. And how I got onto this idea is I was down at my comic book shop today, and they have a deal called a brown bag deal. So for $10, you get a brown bag, and you can pack it full of as many comic books as it'll hold. So what I decided to do today is I rummaged through all those bags and all those boxes of comics, and I filled them up with 90s comics from companies that no longer are around, or companies that were trying to jump on the superhero comic book bandwagon, or just books that people might have forgotten about or whatever. And I decided I would do a video about that and maybe talk a little bit about each one of them. So this is the full stack of everything I got right here. This is about everything I could fit into a brown paper bag without it busting at the seams. So a lot of this stuff here, if you're an old head, you might remember some of it. If you are a new reader and you see something that catches your eye, none of this stuff is really worth anything, and you can probably find a great deal of it in dollar boxes around you. So we will start here at the top. Dark Dominion #1. This is from Defiant Comics. Defiant was a company that was launched by Jim Shooter after his exit from Valiant. He launched Defiant, and it was going to be something similar to Valiant. Tight universe, tight continuity. Dark Dominion. The other comic they had out that I thought was really good was it's called The Good Guys. And The Good Guys, what that was there was like 5 or 6 kids at a comic book convention, and something happened and they all got powers, and they kind of formed this team called The Good Guys. The other comic that they had, which is this one, which was Dark Dominion, and this one I dug this one as well. And you see here on the cover, developed by Jim Shooter and Steve Ditko. Yes, that Steve Ditko. And the really cool thing about this is there's this guy right here, and he can see and enter into like this other realm, and like he sees like these little demons or these parasites. And these are the things that they can affect people. They can make you depressed. These things can make you really anxious or angry or jealous or whatever. And he goes into this dimension. Like this first issue here opens up, and this guy, he's like screaming, like he's got a knife and he's screaming at people. He's acting like a crazy person. So the guy here goes into this dimension, and he sees that this guy has this sort of like I don't know if demon is the right word or not, but it's like a little creature, and is tweaking his thoughts and his mind and making that guy act out and act all dangerous or whatever. And you see he grabs it, pulls it off that guy, and the guy kind of settles down. The guy kind of, he see right here, he goes, I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry or whatever, So you can see just pulling that thing off that guy kind of got him to chill out a little bit. And then when he leaves the McDonald's, he enters that little dimension, and we see how that dimension looks and its impact upon New York. We see all these little demons and parasites or whatever they are. Like we see this one right here. It's feeding on like this homeless person, and he just like kicks it off. He goes, "Take a hike, you little leech. Lady's already got enough worries." This was a little cool book that I personally liked. I liked this and The Good Guys. I thought it was a really cool concept. This guy right here, he can enter into this other realm and see like these little demons that are affecting people or whatever. That was from Defiant. Of course, didn't last totally very long at all. Topps got into the comic book game as well. They had X-Files. They had Mars Attacks. But they had a whole bunch of Jack Kirby books. They had Jurassic Park too. I forgot about that. But the Jack Kirby stuff they had, I think by and large, they were like doodles or sketches that Kirby had done, and he never developed anything with them. And this was one of them here, Teen Agents. This was written by Kurt Busiek. It was called Jack Kirby's Teen Agents, but Kirby didn't have anything to do with the book himself. Like I said, Topps, they got a bunch of these concepts that Kirby had. There was this one. There was, I think it was Satan 6 or something like that. And they were all characters that had been created by Kirby, but other creators were developing them and working on them. This nothing really ever came of these, and Topps Comics quickly faded. Now, Dark Horse, they got into the game as well, and I remember when they did this thing, it was called Comics Greatest World, and they were putting these comics out, and they were $1 each. And it was for 4 weeks, and each week would give you 4 books. So you would get 4 books each week for 4 weeks, and that's how they were debuting their superhero world. Now, prior to this, Dark Horse was mostly like movie tie-ins, Thing from Another World, Predator, Aliens, Terminator, The Mask, some Star Wars stuff. So they threw their hat into the ring with comic books and gave us Comics Greatest World. And like you had this logo right here. This logo was for this particular week. We had this here. This was called Mecha. I think this was like an Iron Man type guy. And then this was another week. They had... Oh, no, wait. I take that back. So you had four like worlds or whatever you want to call it. You had 4 areas, 4 locations over the space of 4 weeks. So like week 2, you would have from this location here, Mecha. And then from this location here, you had Hero Zero, which is kind of like a kaiju book. This is Art Adams' cover right here, I believe. Yeah, just Art Adams on the cover, not on the interior. This was called Hero Zero. And then you had week 3, you had this location with the Wolfgang. If you remember the Pamela Anderson movie called Barbed Wire, she got her debut in these Dark Horse Comics Greatest Worlds. And then like here's a week 1, Division 13. I think this was kind of like some government agency or whatever, and they patrolling dimensions or something like that. I don't remember much about it, but the real hook was they were rolling it out 4 issues a week for 4 weeks, and they were $1 each. So it wasn't like a really big drain on your wallet to pick it up. It wasn't the size of a regular comic. It was like half of a comic. It was very thin, as you can see. But by and large, nothing really came of any of these except for Barbed Wire being adapted into a movie. They did have another one that was called Ghost, and that was a reporter. That was about a reporter who, I think she had died and came back to life and she was a ghost. But I think the real big claim to fame on that one was that Adam Hughes did a whole bunch of those issues before he really took off. But yet again, something that didn't really seem to catch on. Now, something that I quite personally enjoyed was the Ultraverse. Now, this was Malibu. This was an imprint of the Malibu comics, and a lot of the talent on these Ultraverse books was legit Marvel and DC people. So, like right here, you had Steve Englehart on this. In the Ultraverse, this was a very by-the-book superhero style universe. This one of Strangers was one of its initial launch titles. The concept of this book is and it's called The Strangers because these 6 or 7 people, they were all on this subway not subway, I'm sorry. What's the thing called? The streetcar or whatever it is they have in San Francisco. They were all on that, and it was struck by this mysterious energy blast, and a bunch of people got powers. So that was the big hook, and that's why they're called the Strangers. They were all basically strangers to each other, and then they managed to team up and decide to make themselves a superhero team. This guy's name here, his name is Adam Bob, if I'm not mistaken, which is got to be up there with one of the worst names ever. But Ultraverse, they had really good... Ultraverse, to me, was really known for its story. The artwork, not incredibly good, but the writers were really talented. They had like the real talented guys from DC and Marvel on their books. Here's another one of those Dark Horse Comics Greatest Worlds, Out of the Vortex. But yeah, Ultraverse, they had the Strangers, which I thought was really cool. I enjoyed this book. Solution, I don't remember much of this one other than it being just like a kind of like generic mercenary group. Who was on this book right here? The Problem. James Hudnall, penciler Derek Robertson. I don't remember this being one of my favorites. I probably read an issue or two. It's very much a 90s book. You've got the chick with legs for days with a sword. You've got the brutal monster that looks kind of like Pit. All the boxes are checked off here. Look like your generic 90s teams. You got the martial arts guy. You've got this woman here, some sort of exotic alien or from another dimension sorceress or something like that. Mantra. This was another book. I remember this. Now, the whole story about this was kind of maybe ahead of its time a little bit. There's this guy. He has been fighting evil across history, and every time he dies, he comes back as another soldier in this never-ending war. And this time, when he dies, instead of coming back as another badass dude that's a soldier, he comes back as like this woman. So now, for the first time, instead of being like some badass dude that's a soldier in this war, he comes back as a woman, and he has to learn to... It's like we kind of get a little rundown of it right here. It was him, Boneyard. For 15 centuries, I'd fought against him as a warrior in the service of his blood enemy, Archimage. But I was a man. Then I was put into this body to become a powerful magician. But until then, I was just a woman, and Boneyard was looking at me as though I was his personal property. And this is by Mike Barr, who wrote a whole bunch of Flash issues. You know, today, if you did something like this, you could really kind of touch upon, you know, like gender roles or whatever. But then, back in the 90s, when they do this, you know, it was just kind of like a slap in the face, like a guy, he's a guy forever, and then he comes back as a woman. He's like, oh my God, how am I supposed to deal with this? Now, this was another book. This was called Sludge. And this was very much like a Man-Thing or Swamp Thing style book. Big, horrible beast living in the sewers. This is written by Steve Gerber. Big, horrible monster living in the sewers, not capable of speech or thought or whatever. And Steve Gerber, he wrote a whole bunch of Man-Thing issues that would be very similar to this. See, look, we get right here, we see how his speech patterns are. Can't die right. Hell with it then. Lay down and waste. Nothing ever became of this book, really. Then you have Freaks. Now this one, I remember this one very well. This was kind of like a X-Men style story. Characters who had their ability, they were like high school characters, and they had these abilities manifest, and it really made them, you know, outcast. Like, you had one guy, he was like a football star. You had another girl, she was like the popular girl on campus, and then they get these powers, and they have to, it ruins their lives, and they have to go on the run or whatever, and they try to find other kids that have this ability to help them. But this one was very much X-Men style vibes. War Strike. I don't remember much about this issue here. I think this is a Walt Simonson cover. That's Simonson's signature right there, it looks like. I don't remember much about this one. Look at that. Just big muscle man just shooting guns at other big muscle man. The Heart. I don't recognize anybody involved in this. Now, Prototype, this was like Ultraverse's Iron Man character, essentially. It was a armored superhero. The armor was, I think it was like supplied or funded through like another corporation. So you would have like upgrades and different people piloting it throughout the different time periods or whatever. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, we created the Prototype program several years ago. It was expensive, but served its purpose. Prototype became associated with Ultratech as Mr. Whipple was to... Prototype became as associated with Ultratech as Mr. Whipple was to bathroom tissue. Boy, that's a reference that nobody's going to get. And greatly enhanced our image, facilitating our entry into the consumer market. Prototype has also protected our investments overseas, increased our stock prices and net income. So you kind of get the gist what this book was all about. Then we had Firearm. This was probably the best. I don't know if this was the best written one, but it was definitely up there. This was written by James Robinson. And Firearm was essentially like a detective. He was like a private eye or whatever, who had like a background as kind of like a former, you know, like CIA, FBI, MI6 type guy, you know, and he got involved in cases where people would hire him, and he, you know, the cases involved like other superheroes. Fun fact, this book here, one of the promos they had for it was they included a VCR tape along with one of the issues So there was like a small firearms movie, I think it was like 10 or 15 minutes long on the VCR tape that you could get. And that's probably one of the more unique promos that was out there. Prime. Now this there was another Ultraverse book that was called Hard Case, and it was about this guy. He got these superpowers, and it allowed him to become an actor, and he had a team, and they were really famous, and had action figures and all that type of stuff. And then one day they ran across a villain that they couldn't defeat, and like he was the only person standing or whatever. But Hard Case and Prime, these were probably the last two books that I remember from Ultraverse that I remember personally reading. They didn't have any Hard Case because I was looking for it. But Prime, the long story short for this book is there was this kid. It was basically a Shazam style book, but instead of getting struck by lightning and turning into a big Superman type hero, it was some sort of bioorganic like blob that formed around him and made him Prime. So he was a little kid, and come to find out, his dad was like some sort of scientist, and his dad had experimented on him, and he granted him the ability to like turn into this. He could like form. Like the kid was really big into superheroes, so of course his ability, he kind of manifested that ability into turning into a superhero. But it was like instead of him being like a person entirely, he just made this like a blobby type form around him. See, this is Hard Case. This was the other book I was talking about. Trying to see if they show Prime in here. Oh yeah, see, so here it is. This is the kid right here. He's utilizing this power. It explodes out from underneath him. And he's turning into Prime, which is the version of the superhero he envisions himself to be. Now, later on, he would get tired of being like this goody-goody superhero, and the version of Prime that he formed around him was kind of like some 90s biker, anti-hero type guy. This was probably my favorite book, and I frequently think about trying to put a run together of this because I really liked the creators on it. Norm Brayfogle, obviously, Hall of Fame Batman guy. He's an incredible Batman artist. Len Straczynski, he wrote a JSA book I really enjoyed. Gerard Jones, he was another name that was in the industry at the time. But the reason I always stop from whatever always prevents me from pulling the trigger on getting this Prime book is Gerard Jones went to jail for one of the worst crimes that you can imagine. I'm not going to go into any more than that. You can look him up on Google, and I really don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. So even though me picking these books up doesn't help him out or financially do anything, he's just such a huge piece of shit that I don't want him to have anything with his name attached to me. So that was that. Let's see what else we have. We have another Defiant book here. This was Warriors of Plasm. Now this had a very 90s tie-in card set to it. If you collected all the cards for Warriors of Plasm, it formed the Zero issue, which told the story of which takes place before this first issue right here. Now, Warriors of Plasm was going to be Defiant's really big flagship title. It was going to be, I remember a little bit of it, not a whole bunch, but it was going to be, I remember it being very, now you would call it like a Game of Thrones type situation, where you have like this dimension here, and you've got the politicking of different families and different courts against people, and you have like these 5 or 6 people right here who are abducted from Earth, and they're kind of caught up in the middle. Now the real hook for this world is, in this world everything is alive, so things don't get destroyed or thrown away. Everything is organic material, so it just gets recycled into something else. It gets turned into this type of thing, and a weapon can get turned into a vehicle or whatever. But Warriors of Plasma, the thing that's remembered for the most is probably the fact that it had a really cool trading card. We had another Comics Greatest World right here, Monster. Now this guy here, his name was X. He had an ongoing, I don't think it lasted terribly long. I don't recognize any of these names, any of these creatives. Now Nightman. Nightman was another Ultraverse book. This guy here, he also had a really funny story. He had a syndicated TV show. But Nightman was a guy, he was, I think he was in like some sort of car wreck or something, and he got the ability to hear people's thoughts. So he heard criminals' thoughts and evil thoughts or whatever, and using his he was like some Taekwondo black belt or something, I don't know, and he would using his ability to hear thoughts and sensing evil, he would try and right those wrongs or whatever. But look how 90s he looks right here. The long mullet, the red eye patch. Now Ultraverse, they ultimately, not Ultraverse, I'm sorry, but since Malibu published Ultraverse Comics, Malibu was bought out by Marvel. So Marvel owns all the rights to these characters, but the reason we don't ever see these in Marvel doing anything with them is because that means that they would have to pay royalties to, like, if you wanted to do some Nightman stuff, you would have to pay Steve Englehart some money, and they're not gonna do that. So they essentially bought all these characters up and just never did nothing with them. Now, Crazy Man, this is a book that was from Continuity Comics. The thing I know most about them is they were a Neal Adams imprint. Everyone here knows who Neal Adams is. He was an incredible artist. Great work on Batman, great work on Green Arrow and Green Lantern. Huge advocate for creators' rights. But this Continuity Comics, I know it had this book here, Crazy Man. It's a really beautifully drawn book. This is the first time I've ever looked through it. Wow, look at that. That's a great shot right there, if that explosion. This seems like a really weird book right here. This seems like a very introspective book. Well, Danny, there is such a place somewhere, and many of us in the intelligence community strongly suspect that the setting for the inmate was that very place. There's an island located in Devil's Triangle. Strangely enough, people went disappearing and held down there. This seems like a really weird book right here. It almost seems like that. I wonder if that's what he means. I wonder if he says inmate right here because they can't say the prisoner, that old British TV show. I wonder if that's why they call it inmate instead of the prisoner. Really cool looking artwork. I mean, he's even in that bubble like that guy from The Prisoner was. Oh, wow, this is so cool. Hey, you must be number 2, the leader guy from The Inmate. Oh, good, you've seen the show. Oh, yeah, that's got to be what they're doing. But I don't remember anything ever coming. They had this book. They had another book called Armor. They had another book called Megalith. They had this book here called Miss Mystic. I never read this one either. Original story by Neil Adams. Neil Adams on pencils. This looks a little more straight up superhero than the previous Crazy Man. But Continuity Comics, I don't really remember anything coming out of them. I don't care. It doesn't seem to matter that they said 1988 is our year. It definitely was not. And the other thing is, they were charging $2 for a book. $2 in 1988. That was a lot of money. That was a lot of money. Most of the Marvel books, I think then, were 75 cents or $1. You know, something like that. That was another thing that's about these books. They were higher. They cost more than what Marvel books did at the time. Warriors of Plasma #1 costing $3. Prime $1.95, $1.95. You know, a lot of these were, your Marvel books were $1, $1.50, $1.75, something like that. Look, $2.50. And then the last book we've got here, this is a book called The Ferret from the pages of The Protectors. Malibu was the label. Ultraverse was one of their imprints. Originally, Image was going to be an imprint with Malibu, I believe, but they ended up deciding to go third party. Image did, and they ended up deciding not working with Malibu or something to that effect. I can't remember exactly how that story went down or whatever, but I know an Image originally had something to do with Malibu, but pulled out at the last minute. And this here is Ferret #1 from the pages of The Protectors. People always wonder why Image books took off the way they did. Well, let's just say that you're a kid, you're 12, 13 years old, or whatever it is, and you pick up a book and it looks like this. Nothing wrong with this, but it doesn't scream, it doesn't jump off the page to a young teenage boy, especially when things that were all popular at the time were like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct. You know, this stuff here, it doesn't look very dynamic or whatever. It looks kind of generic, honestly. The name The Protectors doesn't really grab you. The Ferret, I guess he's supposed to be like a Wolverine type of character. That doesn't really, scream cool either. That's the thing. Kids can tell when something's cool or not. They just inherently know what's cool. Books like this, like Ultraverse, they were kind of geared towards people that were already established comic book fans. And people who knew that writers like Steve Englehart were great writers or whatever. But this is just a look at some of the comic books and some of the comic book companies that were out there during the 90s boom. Like I said, most of these were just flash in the pans. If you look most of these titles up online, if you look them up online, none of them lasted very long. You might have gotten maybe 10 or 12 issues out of some. Some of them didn't even last that long, maybe 4 or 5, if that. But this has kind of been a trip down memory lane for me as a longtime comic book reader. And if you are a newer fan, you've probably never seen any of this stuff before. But, however, if you have seen some of it and it's something that grabs your eye, you can usually find this stuff for $1. So, definitely check it out if it grabs your attention. You're not going to be on the hook for so much money. But that was a look at 90s comic books. And until next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good night, and bye-bye.